Okay, you should have the message now about recording. We will adhere to Barleak policy that we'll be turning off the recording at the end of Stephen's talk before the Q&A. So it'll just be during Stephen's talk. We'll have a 5-minute changeover afterwards. You've got chance to and time to switch to your new room because we'll have a new session starting at around 12:05. But I think, yeah, without further ado, it's a pleasure to hand over to you, Stephen.
Okay, thanks very much for that introduction, Eddie. And I thought I'd start with this quote. So I'm not going to read out the whole thing because we're already a bit behind time, but the key point about this quote is, which is from a paper by Nissenbaum on privacy and integrity in terms of surveillance. So this is from 2004. So quite a while ago now in terms of what's changed in terms of technology, and also in recent years, especially with COVID and surveillance, people are very worried about this. But the key point here, and why I'm using this quote, and I'll come back to it at the end, is because it's about the introduction of technology, the impact it has without the possibility of careful deliberation over potential harms and benefits. And I'm going to be talking about artificial intelligence and translation software. And as Phil already alluded to at the beginning, that Groves and Munt have done a lot of work on this, and my work is building upon that. I reference it within the talk, and there are certain parallels there. Phil mentioned about the optimism that people who are doing research into this feel about the impact it could have on education. However, when you first are introduced to it, people do have a tendency to see more of the potential harms, and especially where it could be a threat to their work. So I'm just being aware about this in the presentation. So just briefly to introduce myself, I'm Stephen Gow from the University of York. I work currently in quality assurance. I've just moved over into this team. So looking at standards, assessment and academic integrity, assessment policy at the university, which includes academic misconduct policies. And I'm actually from an EAP background myself. I taught for many years in China, also the British Council in Cairo. My PhD was about Chinese students' understanding and experience of academic integrity and plagiarism, for example, in transition to studying in the UK. And I've been involved in producing academic integrity resources such as Turnitin tutorials, online tutorials, referencing sessions and guidance within the University of York for about 8 years now. And I do provide academic misconduct policy and advice for staff and students, which is where this talk is coming from. SCA is obviously, the Standing Committee for Assessment, for those of you who don't know the acronym, is responsible for the academic misconduct policy, and we have been seeing cases of academic misconduct potentially involving the use of translation software. But I don't just want to point this out in terms of this talk. Groves and Munt will do a far better job of that later. However, there are also significant implications from just general artificial intelligence, and I'll say that languages, whether it's EAP or the study of EFL, are the canaries in the coal mine on this. And in the next 5 years, I would say there's going to be a significant impact. And the thing is with academic integrity, and especially academic misconduct, is that if you think about integrity as sort of a bridge, the integrity of the programs that we run, academic misconduct often shows the cracks or things that we need to look at within that. So that's what I'm concentrating on today. Now, I can talk about this a little bit, but I'd like to try and do a demo. I'm not too sure if it's going to work, but I'll do a demo in a second. So most people will be familiar, at least to a little bit, about artificial intelligence and the leaps and bounds it's making. So for example, in 1997, Garry Kasparov was beaten by Deep Blue at chess, and that was quite in the public imagination. But things tended to get a bit quiet. I mean, rumbling around in the background, none of these massive breakthroughs. Recently, we've had AlphaGo beating the best Korean Go player in the world, or the best player in the world. And so the technology is coming on leaps and bounds. In terms of the impact on higher education, we are seeing it. I mean, you see it in your Google Mail when it suggests things, or in Google Docs if you're using them, that suggest people to send things through or finish your sentences, things like that. In terms of academic misconduct, most recently, we've seen problems with spinning software, which is software that can automatically paraphrase work, and translation software as well, which I may have to show you if this demo doesn't work for some reason. But the one thing I think to be aware of at the moment is OpenAI's GPT-3 software, which is actually, it can do a number of different tasks. Writing is one of them. So it's actually a large language model of artificial intelligence that works with machine learning. And whereas the chess programs are sort of specialist AI trained to do a particular thing, GPT is more general, and it's been funded in the beginning by Peter Thiel and Elon Musk, people like that. So it's quite a big deal. So let me see if this works. I may have the problem that my free version of this has expired. I had this problem the other day, but hopefully it will work. If it doesn't work, you can go and have a free trial of it. So can you see that, Eddie? Is that clear on the screen?
Yep, we can see it.
Yeah, so you enter in your title and you can start a sentence here. And this is just the free version. So let's. Okay, so this is just written that. So sitting in a cubicle all day might make you feel like you're living the dream, but there are plenty of ways to make your life more satisfying, less dull, and ultimately make more money. Okay, so the AI is a bit random in what it does. Sometimes, actually, I don't think it worked off my prompt there. Let's see if I can do another one there.
This GPT-3, did you say, Stephen? Sorry.
Yeah, so this is GPT-3 software. And this is Shortly AI is the company that's called. You have to pay to use it, but there is free versions. It is used by people in industry to write copy, and to it's a bit of a parrot. It just goes onto the internet and trawls through for things using statistical relationships, and can identify relationships and start writing on certain topics. It's a bit hit and miss. However, as many of you are involved in teaching, seeing some of this, you're probably thinking through the pessimistic possibilities on this at the moment, of students using this to write essays, for example. And now Gardner was talking about earlier, and they were talking about the research that's done in highly proficient students. And that's where it might be quite easy to detect software usage, but depending on the students and the level of students you have, what would be the difference between reading something written by this AI and written something where a student has done an all-nighter trying to write an essay? They essentially do very similar things, just going through, trawling through and finding what they can write and then blurting something out. It's just the AI is a bit quicker at it. There's this sort of software. There's also a number of different options for bots which could be used, chatbots, for example, having a handbook, the course handbook being accessible to students by a chatbot. How long's my essay? Put it in the chatbot and it just automatically trawls through, tells you the information. What's the deadline? A lot of this stuff could be very useful. And for this, I recommend Cox's research report on the Coming Intelligent University, where he has provided a number of different fictions, almost science fictions of universities in the not so distant future, and different accounts, minutes from meetings, student accounts, interviews with people about different use of AI. So I'd really recommend this one for looking at the different options about what this could be used for, including academic misconduct. So this is an emerging area, and I think the key point here I'd like to say is about science fiction can often have that dystopian edge to it. However, there are good reasons to be optimistic about this, but we need to be aware about the technology that is available. So the research on this, and Groves and Munt are going to present later, done some excellent research on this, highlighting certain areas where it might be a problem. Misunderstanding translation software, for example, as a remedy for writing for language proficiency, and where it also might clash with academic misconduct policies, which is what I want to talk about. So as I've already showed you, the technology is increasingly advanced with AI. In terms of translation software, such as Google Translate, Stapleton and Lyon did some research testing students. I can't remember whether they were, I think they were secondary students, English proficiency versus Google Translate, and seeing whether teachers could tell the difference and which was actually producing better work. I recommend that. And they've had some very interesting findings with that. Alison Organ, who I had lots of discussions with about this at York St John, has been very helpful, points out the problems with translation software, for example, with ab initio students and also weaker students. And in this area that we're talking about today, EAP, it's obviously provides a big problem about whose language you're assessing, which I'll talk about in a moment. LaCour and Martin, and also Organ from York St John, have pointed out that the problem with this software is that some good students can use it really well, and it can actually be an assistant for them to use their language. However, it seems to increase the gap between weaker students and higher performing students. Weaker students using it as a crutch rather than to improve their performance. And another author points out the problems of translation tools is that it can aid translingual plagiarism. We've had a few cases of this recently where the suspicion is that the student has been using sources from another language and translating them into English. And finally, just a point about the ethics of this is that Google, while it appears to be free, is not really free. We're training it with our intellectual property. But as Zuboff points out, many people don't really have much choice over this. Okay, so moving on, this provides a real problem, as Groves and Munt have pointed out, for university policy. So the first thing that we've done is go to look at our university policy. And it states very clearly, assessed work should not be translated prior to marking. So the use of translation tools, not even using, we don't even say it in the guide, but obviously students shouldn't be using artificial intelligence to write an essay for them. But this is a bridge we're going to have to cross in terms of policy. We've had to update our academic misconduct policy to introduce the possibility of use of software in open assignments being cheating where it's been specifically prohibited in the assessment specifications. This is something that we've started with, and I will talk about a bit more about what we intend to do in the future, because we need a university-wide approach to this. There's a problem about devising central policy on this. There needs to be central policy, but there are departmental differences. For example, there are differences between assessments in a EFL and assessments in EAP. EFL, you might be looking to assess language proficiency, where it depends on the level of EAP whether you're looking to do that, especially once students are on programs rather than on pre-sessionals. Now, this has obvious implications for academic integrity and authorship. In terms of authorship, technology has been driving a lot of the research in academic integrity, especially since copy and paste technology came in. So you've got the ease of accessing the internet and copy and pasting, which meant an increase in copy and paste plagiarism essentially by students. It became a lot easier to do that, changing writing habits. Turnitin is introduced, which enables people to identify this. But what that has done is it has been useful in some ways, but it's also really enabled a much larger appearance of contract cheating. So students buying essays, for example, because they know that Turnitin can detect the copy and paste plagiarism. Now, Turnitin is working on further software, but as has been pointed out in the literature, this leads to a bit of an arms race. This is a difficult one to know how to approach. In terms of academic misconduct, what we're seeing in cases, with AI so far is translation software. And the cases are very problematic because a student produces a piece of work. The academic judgment of the marker is that that a student on their program couldn't have possibly produced this in the conditions that we set. So they're overperforming. So a few questions come up from the academic misconduct cases on this. Is there genuine improvement? Can the students prove this? How do they prove this? It's very difficult. Now, within our policy, it's not beyond all reasonable doubt. We say on the balance of probabilities. So they're weighing up the probabilities of whether a student has genuinely improved it, or as we've seen with COVID-19 recently, a shift to 24-hour exams from closed exams. Has the student just spent far too long on the assessment? Is it a 3-hour assessment that they've taken 8 or 9 hours to do? Now, we are finding with students on the 24-hour exams that anecdotally, people are saying they're spending 8 or 9 hours. Now, technically, this should be academic misconduct, but we're giving students the benefit of the doubt in terms of COVID at the moment. But this is something that is only short term. We need to find a solution to this. In other cases, students just won't admit using the software. They probably have. They can't provide evidence of improvement. And even if you look at the other writing samples, there's just not the proof there. And finally, another session on at the moment about proofreaders, but we do find that sometimes proofreaders or native speaking friends have gone a bit too far in advising on this. So in terms of assessment, I've already mentioned COVID and the rapid shift to from closed invigilated exams with quite a different setup. It's very different having somebody watching you, but now we're sort of taking academic integrity as what you do when nobody else is watching. And this is very problematic when there is so much pressure on students around employability and all of these other things. Who or what are you assessing? Groves and Munt point this out in their latest paper. Is it unassisted language or is it computer mediated language use that you are assessing? We have had a skyrocket in academic misconduct accusations with COVID. I just mentioned that there's a lot of suspicion around assessments. Now, Alison Organ, which I've referenced in the slides at the end, has looked at this, and I know that we're doing this at the university here as well, a variety of assessment types to assess students along a number of different things, including potentially the use of translations tools. And assessing writing in a foreign language, if you're assessing EFL, not assessing the language in the extended essays, but assessing for content and just accepting the fact that students may have been using tools within that. So these are all things that need to be discussed. And finally, Cope, Kalantzis, and Sear Smith actually argue quite that a lot of the traditional pedagogy and assessments aren't actually that good, and that AI may be able to promise a new way forward for education. However, as they point out here, assessment drives institutionalized change. I'm quoting them here. Assessment drives institutionalized education, and change in assessment will change education. And I think certainly in the next 10 years, we're going to see that, whether in public higher education or whether there's more private companies becoming involved. Now, the implications for this, because I've only got 1 minute left, I believe, is that, as I've said, the languages are the canaries in the coal mine here. This is coming for all higher education. That GPT-3 software is being superseded by better software. There's already one by Microsoft, which is coming out, which is far more powerful. Now, it's going to cost, but these things can write computer code. They could probably do assessments based on assessment briefs quite soon, and it's going to be very difficult to tell. There will be disruption. While there are utopian views and dystopian views, I prefer what I found was called neutropian, sort of neutral views of the future, where there's going to be good for some people. Yeah, if you're into artificial intelligence and you're researching it, it's going to be really good for you. But if you're teaching languages and this is your expertise, this could be a problem. And I know this as I left a job in a library once and was replaced by a machine. I'll just wrap up now, Eddie, okay? And so the impact, student administration around handbooks and things, AI is going to be able to put together very useful bots in specific areas. Also contract cheaters, people that write essays for students, they're going to be put out of a job by this software. It has huge resource implications. It's going to be expensive to do this and take time. And it's going to raise questions about the economics of higher education, especially in terms of reliance in the UK on EMI, on foreign students. Is it even still necessary to speak English to study abroad? But these are the more deeper questions. There's also lots of questions around ethics, inclusivity, and equality, but it's too much to think about. So my final thing is the potential solutions. And this is also, I read the JISC report, which I recommend here, yesterday, because I was like, I better check what the recent stuff has said. And it chimes exactly with that. I was really happy reading it. I'm also a bit worried you might thought I've plagiarized it, but I haven't. It's just a validity here, okay? So careful deliberation is what is needed, referring back to the quote. Focused reflection on assessments and new technologies, dialogue between students, staff, and administration, guidance and policy at an institutional level, departmental level, module level. We need to think about this carefully. And academic integrity. We need a balance between trusting students to get on with things while also acknowledging the high stakes of the assessments and the big business that higher education is. Because if we don't do that, people will lose trust in the awards that we give. And that's a big problem. I've spoken to students who've returned to China who says a degree from the UK is not what it once was. That people do talk about the quality. This is coming through in the discourse. And then finally, over the long term, curriculum and assessment development. It's a shame we really don't have more time to do this. Sorry, Eddie, went a bit over there, but thank you very much.
That's fine. Thank you, Stephen. Very interesting indeed, and slightly frightening in parts. Lots of food for thought, both at kind of classroom level, as well as kind of policy and procedural level. Do we have any questions at all? I'm just going to turn the recording off and then we can hand over to questions.